President Putin says Russia's relations with Syria are deeply rooted and the Russian stand is unchangeable. And the Russian Foreign Ministry says investigations indicate that al-Houla massacre was carried out by terrorists to foil settlement efforts. Syria rejects US and Western attempts to exploit the UN Human Rights Council to interfere in other states' affairs. Witnesses to al-Houla massacre says that massacre was committed and carried out against specific families that support the government. Hello and welcome, this is News in English. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesman Alexander Lukashevich said that the preliminary results of the investigations carried out by the Syrian authorities regarding al-Houla massacre indicate that the crime was a well-planned operation carried out by gunmen to thwart the efforts aiming to settlement of the crisis politically and to begin a new stage of bloody violence in Syria. Lukashevich further said that the tragedy in al-Houla showcases the results of providing financial support and smuggling advanced weapons to armed groups, sending foreign mercenaries to them. He noted that Russia has often underlined the elements that have a negative impact on the plan of the UN envoy to Syria, Kofi Annan, first among which the fact that some primary players in the international arena are unwilling to act within the logic of a peaceful settlement, adding that these same players prefer their own agendas and their main point is changing the government in Syria. The preliminary report issued by the committee in charge of investigating al-Houla massacre affirmed that all the victims of the massacre were from peaceful families, pointing out that the victims were killed from short range and by sharp instruments and not through bombardment.
In a press conference held last Thursday at the Foreign Ministry, head of the investigation committee, Brigadier Qasim Jamal Suleiman, said that the terrorist groups stationed in al-Houla killed the victims during the attack launched against the law enforcement forces which did not enter the area. He pointed out that a number of dead bodies found in the area were for the terrorists killed during the clashes with law enforcement forces. Suleiman went on to say that the investigation committee depended on testimonies of eyewitnesses, referring that some of these testimonies would be released to mass media. He stressed that there were 5 positions for law enforcement forces around al-Houla, and the aim of the armed attack was to change the region into an outlawed area. Suleiman said that about 600 to 800 gunmen gathered in the village coming from nearby areas and used heavy weapons including mortar bombs, machine guns and missiles. He concluded that the main objective of the massacre was to target the relatives of member of the People's Assembly Abdul Mu'ti Mishlib, but the massacre expanded to include other families. On his part, spokesman of the Foreign and Expatriate Ministry Jihad Maqdisi said that when the investigation is completed, its results will be presented to the international community. He added that the Syrian government was the first to inform General Robert Mood to go to the place of the massacre. Maqdisi said that by committing heinous massacres, the terrorists aim to create sedition among the Syrian people. He pointed out that it was very strange that at the time Annan was visiting Syria, Washington and its allies were expelling Syrian ambassadors, referring that it is regrettable that the UN Secretary General changes his job from preserving international peace and security to talking about civil wars. Maqdisi concluded that the Syrian government is contacting the UN observers daily, stressing Syria's commitment to Annan's plan, but the regional parties and the opposition do not want to implement their commitments towards this plan.
Forces that support terrorists in Syria continue their use of international organizations such as the Human Rights Council to adopt the project's resolutions that support the Syrian people's murderers and protected them. Russia, Syria, China and Cuba reject the Council resolutions that reflect the disability of those who put them, as their participation in killing the victims of al-Houla massacre once again is evident. More in the following.
Syria's representative to the Human Rights Council, Al-Hamwi, said yesterday that the way in which al-Houla crime was committed indicates the perpetrators are terrorists linked to sabotage and takfiri groups whose main motive was to ignite sedition in a region with multi-social fabrics. Al-Hamwi, speaking at a Human Rights Council session to vote on a resolution to conduct investigation into al-Houla massacre, said the massacre, in which innocents were brutally killed, was condemned in the soonest terms, explaining how armed terrorist groups of 600 to 800 gunmen attacked al-Houla region and committed the massacre using various types of weapons and mortars and then white weapons when they ran out of ammunition to kill peaceful civilians. He said the Syrian government announced the formation of a judicial investigation committee to investigate into the crime since the early hours of its Al-Hamwi referred to the findings of the committee's initial report, which reveals that the murderers' main motive behind the crime was to ignite sectarian sedition in a region made up of multi-community social fabric living in peace and amity. He also highlighted the report indicated that there were no signs of shellfire on the mortars' bodies, dismissing the claims of the Higher Commissioner for Human Rights in her speech at the session. He added that the committee stressed that the initial investigation conducted the number of the arrested, some of them holding non-Syrian nationalities. He denounced how some of those sponsoring countries openly uncover the hateful media support to the armed terrorist groups and ships loaded with shipments of advanced weapons provided to these groups, in addition to hosting and training thousands of terrorists and sending them to Syria to carry out killings and sabotage acts. He wondered how these countries anticipate the investigation results in al-Houla and make hasty judgments and accusations against the Syrian government, saying that their aim is to provide cover for the real killers, question the role of the UN observers and foil Annan's plan, which they bet on its failure. He added that these countries ignored that the style of committing the crime indicates its perpetrators, who are the terrorists linked to the sabotage groups, noting that the investigation will reveal the responsibility and that of the instigations, as that the confessions of the arrested among them will be made open to the whole world. Al-Hamwi said that Syria has repeatedly announced that it is responsible for protecting its people against killing and terrorism, and that it will do every necessary thing in line with the Syrian laws and its commitments towards the international agreements and conventions to preserve its people and come out of the crisis.
Russian President Vladimir Putin and his French counterpart François Hollande stressed the need to continue the mission of the UN envoy to Syria, Kofi Annan, to the end, which would achieve the primary goal of the international observer mission and reach a political resolution to the Syrian crisis through dialogue. During a joint press conference on Friday, Putin said that Russia and France agreed to exert efforts to reach a diplomatic resolution for the crisis in Syria, saying that any talk that Annan's plan is destined to fail is a big mistake. He said that Russia's goal is to end violence from all sides, avoid a war in Syria, and initiate dialogue to resolve the crisis, adding that the future of Syria is up to the Syrian people themselves, and that Russia will accept whatever they accept. Putin said that those who believe that they can make decisions on behalf of the peoples are mistaken, and that they can do no such thing in Syria, nor can anyone do that. He urged all international sides to do their best to ensure the success of Annan's plan and act carefully and rationally regarding what's happening in the region, noting that sanctions aren't always effective. Putin said that Russian-Syrian relations are good and date back to many years, and that Russia has no special interest in Syria, and that it will continue to offer advice to resolve all issues peacefully. In turn, Hollande said his talks with Putin dealt with the situation in Syria and announced a plan which must be followed through to the end, exerting all efforts to ensure its success. Hollande said that if the observers do their job, then the political process will be the next stage, which will allow Syria to reach stability and security. But he also alleged that this requires sanctions and pressure, despite his acknowledgement that this entitles risks of causing tension and the threat of war, which would have serious repercussions on the region. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Liu Weimin stressed that his country does not represent an obstacle for solving the Syrian issue, but it is a positive power pushing towards the political solution. He pointed out that the Chinese efforts helped in creating a new opportunity to solve the Syrian issue in a political way. Secretary General of Hezbollah Hassan Nasrallah affirmed the need to find a solution for the crisis in Syria through national dialogue while preserving Syria's unity and sovereignty. Regarding the Lebanese who were abducted in Syria, Nasrallah addressed the abductors, telling them that these men are innocent visitors who should be returned to their families, and that if the abductors have a personal issue with him, then there are many ways to resolve it, but it through war or peace or even love. Adding, but taking innocent people hostage to resolve a specific issue, regardless of its nature and truth, is a great injustice you should refrain from. He called on all the Lebanese to maintain calm, self-control and patience, and give the state time to follow up the issue of abductees who are Lebanese citizens. Therefore, the Lebanese state is responsible for returning them, and that political and religious forces and leaderships should help the state in this regard. Adding that the Lebanese state is working on various levels, day and night, for the issue to reach a good conclusion. In Italy, the Syrian community there organized a solidarity stand against what Syria is facing, a Western and regional attack which aims to destabilize it. This was in the presence of a number of Italian journalists and intellectuals. The participants called upon punishing countries that support the terrorism by money and weapons, such as Saudi and Qatari regimes, in addition to countries that host the terrorists, train them and provide them with weapons in order to foil the Annan plan, which the Syrian government agreed on from the beginning. The circle of rejection in helping the terrorists and supporting them widens as the Turkish member of the parliament for Republicans Muhammad Shakir stressed that the terrorists who exploded themselves and the booby-trapped cars that exploded in Damascus are under the Turkish government responsibility, in which these explosive devices are made in the camps south of the country. On his part, the Turkish Labour Party criticized the decision made by the Government of Justice and Development Party concerning the Syrian diplomats who were working in Syria in the Syrian embassy in Ankara. Meanwhile, the capital Ankara has witnessed different gatherings by the Turkish labor unions in support for the Reform Syria witnesses and denunciation for the Turkish government decision to end the Syrian diplomats' presence in the Syrian embassy. This brings our bulletin to a close. For more details, log on to our website in English, www.syriaonline.sy.